Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, rebel groups in Syria say they've broken the month-long siege of Aleppo for the first time after days of fierce fighting. If it's true and they manage to keep control of a key supply route into the city, it would be a major boost for the insurgents who've been under intense bombardment by Syrian and Russian forces, and relief for 250,000 people who've been trapped in East Aleppo with dwindling supplies, as Jane Death reports.
Joy and relief. Rare things here. Is there finally a way out for people in the anti-Assad half of Aleppo, cut off and bombarded by the Syrian army for months? They're celebrating the news rebel fighters have broken the siege, opening up a way into the surrounded city. The road is too dangerous to leave by, though. Still, it feels like rescue.
We sacrificed a sheep to celebrate the opening of the road to the 450,000 people that the criminal regime wanted to put under siege. Now the regime is under siege.
God gave us victory, and we will show the regime and its Iranian militias.
The fight for Aleppo is the fight for control of northern Syria. President Assad, backed by Russian air power, has been battling to keep Syria's second city. But rebel video appears to show the crucial moment when they move into a Syrian army complex in the southwest. The barracks are deserted. They smash a picture of the president. Outside, military vehicles and weapons seem to lie abandoned. But the Syrian regime denies the siege has been broken. And the rebels are only too aware it's Assad who controls the skies over Aleppo. More than 100 rebels and civilians have been killed in the last week. As rebels outside Aleppo fought their way in to rebels on the inside. And the agony of the war has been visited on another rebel-held town in the north. Millis, a field hospital, was bombed, killing 10 people, 3 of them children.
Well, earlier I managed to speak to Hamza al-Khatib, a doctor at al-Quds Hospital in Aleppo. On Friday, this programme showed the journey he and his family made back into the city. I began by asking him what was going through his mind when he was there with his 6-month-old baby amid all that danger.
The only thing that make me thinking twice about getting back to Aleppo, because she has done nothing wrong with this life, and it's not her responsibility to be involved in this battle. But there is a lot of children. What was making me strong that there are a lot of children inside of Aleppo city. So being a doctor and having the ability to get in and out the border won't make me better than those persons. So what happened to them will happen to me and my family.
It's very, very dangerous to get into the city still. It is a very partial breaking of the siege, isn't it?
Now what the rebels trying to do is to make that road wider. So they are trying to take parts from al-Assad regime to make that road become wider.
Does it concern you that the siege has been broken in part with the help of some very hardline rebels who not so long ago were affiliated to al-Qaeda? Does that concern you that they'll end up reaping the rewards, that they'll end up benefiting?
Actually, I don't know if it's right to say what I'm going to say, but if the siege wasn't broken and the United Nations, as we expected, didn't do anything, the whole 350,000 people will become Al-Qaeda and will become terrorists, because seeing their children dying and starving without helping from anyone, that would make a lot of people radicals. in a kind of way.
Dr. Hamza al-Khatib speaking to me just before we came on air.
Thousands of fighters from rebel and government forces are rushing to join the battle for control of Aleppo as Damascus and Idlib were bombarded with fresh airstrikes in retaliation for lost ground. The Syrian regime denies it, but opposition forces claim to be on their way to retaking Syria's second city. Assad's forces control the area in red. Rebel-held ground is shown in green. At the weekend, the insurgents took Ramusa in the southwest, claiming to have broken the siege of East Aleppo. They're now trying to capture Hamdania, heading for the Castello Road, which the government uses to bring in supplies to troops and an estimated 1.5 million civilians in the west. Our international editor, Lindsay Hilson, reports.
The rebels put up a drone to film the vast government military complex southwest of Aleppo city centre that they seized at the weekend. Cluster munitions disabled weaponry. The soldiers appear to have fled. It's a major prize for those who would overthrow the government. In the middle is the artillery base from which eastern Aleppo has been hammered for the last 4 years. Look at the spent shell cases and ammunition boxes. Tens of thousands of rounds fired into rebel-held Aleppo, where 250,000 civilians live.
This is the artillery area. With God's help, we captured a lot. We do not need this artillery, but at least we saved thousands of Muslims from these bombs. These cannons used to target Syrian towns.
The rebel advance started with this, suicide trucks. It's a tactic used by the group Jabhat al-Nusra, al-Qaeda's franchise in Syria, now rebranded as Jabhat Fatah al-Sham. They're designated by the Americans as a terrorist group, but by leading the charge in Aleppo, they've become heroes to the supposedly moderate rebels who waited in vain for American support.
To break the siege and now move into a stage where we are talking seriously about liberating the city, I think is miraculous in every possible way. And the reason we managed to do that is simply because we, i.e. the revolutionary forces, decided to be united and to act as united.
Some rebel weaponry is makeshift, but the gains they've made in the last few days will convince many that the only way to defeat the government is to work with extremist groups. In recent days, they've opened a supply line to the besieged area they control and cut the government's main supply route from the capital.
When they said Aleppo is under siege, they thought the people would flee, but instead we are going inside. We have stored food and ammunition.
The Syrian government released this cockpit video today. They deny that the rebels have made gains. They know their strength is domination of the skies. They and the Russians have launched some 600 airstrikes in 7 days. Block by block, Aleppo is being destroyed. In the coming days and weeks, they will throw everything they have at the city, regardless of civilian life. This weekend, rebel supporters celebrated on the streets. But victory will be followed by relentless bombardment, as neither side is prepared to relinquish the largest and most symbolically significant city in Syria.
Well, joining us from New York is Dr. Samar Attar, a surgeon at Northwestern Hospital in Chicago and part of the Syrian American Medical Association. Dr. Attar was one of the last medics to get out of Aleppo before the government cut off the main supply route to rebel-held parts of the city. He's been speaking today at a special session at the UN. Dr. Attar, can you just give us a sense of how difficult circumstances were for you to operate in?
Well, life in an Aleppo hospital is rather brutal and pretty exhausting. The hospital where I worked was under constant bombardment. You would hear bombs and missiles, sometimes landing meters away from the doorstep. The hospital itself has been hit by airstrikes so many times that it's been driven underground, so it operates out of a basement. And almost every day, sometimes twice a day, after an attack, after an airstrike on a market, a home, or a school, we'd just be overflooded with patients. There'd be so many patients trying to get through the front door. We'd be so full sometimes there'd be no place to step. The door would be closed. And the scenes are just rather horrifying, even for the most experienced doctors. Nothing prepares you for seeing dismembered bodies, mutilated limbs, dead children. And these are not things that just happen every now and then. These are everyday occurrences, unfortunately.
Is there any one particular image that haunts you since you've returned from Aleppo?
Yeah, when you're in Aleppo, you're doing your best to save lives. You work alongside a remarkable group of doctors and nurses and rescue workers who are selflessly and heroically risking their lives every day. They all could have left Aleppo, but Aleppo is their home. They're not going to abandon their local communities. And unfortunately, in these hospitals, there aren't enough hands, there aren't enough resources to save everyone. So you're making decisions to save one life at the expense of letting someone else die. And I do remember a case where we were doing CPR on a young child. His right leg was obliterated and he wasn't breathing, and we were trying to resuscitate him, trying to bring him back to life. And there was a man on the ground who was bleeding to death from an amputated right leg. But he was alive, he was breathing, and he had a better chance of making it. So we had to stop doing CPR on that child in order to save a man who was bleeding to death on the floor. And anywhere else in the world, if we had enough help, had enough resources, we could have saved both of them. But in Aleppo, unfortunately, you have to make those heart-wrenching, gut-wrenching, everyday decisions to save one at the expense of someone else.
You told the UN today that the international community has failed in its duty.
Well, after 5 years and close to 500,000 people dead and 12 million people being displaced, not just inside Syria, but around neighboring countries and around the world, and extremism and terrorism also being spread, what they're doing hasn't worked.
One of the things you've called for is a no-fly zone. Do you accept that actually escalating military intervention could end up with more casualties in the end?
I think a lot of the death and destruction and displacement has come from aerial bombardment. So when you have civilians and homes and schools and hospitals and marketplaces being attacked every single day from the sky, that's not going to fight terrorism. As a journalist today, Clarissa Ward, said at the council meeting, that actually is the oxygen for spreading more terrorism. So these people need protection. You can ask any doctor, any nurse, any rescue worker inside Aleppo, ask any refugee why they left Aleppo. All of them will tell you they left because of the airstrikes. They will ask you to stop the barrel bombs, stop the missile strikes. They just want to be safe.
Dr. Atta, many people share your concerns.
It's a shame, as I said, that children were actually burning tires.
Excuse me, sorry to interrupt you. Many people share your concerns. They're worried about the barrel bombs, but they also worry about the kinds of rebels who are leading the charge on the ground. People who were al-Qaeda affiliated, the Nusra Front, are leading the charge in Aleppo. Aren't you concerned about these sort of people shaping the future of Aleppo and of Syria?
Well, there certainly has to be a political solution and a political settlement, but that can't be happening when people are being slaughtered and massacred every single day. The people that I met in Aleppo aren't terrorists, and they're not being held hostage by terrorists. They're everyday men, women, and children who just want to put food on their table, send their kids to school, and they want to be safe. And they all knew I was an American. And I would argue that many Syrians, the Syrian people, are all moderate. So the people I met were not terrorists.
Dr. Samar Atta, thank you very much. Jeff.